Hi everyone, thank you for joining today for my thesis topic. Today we're going to be discussing the analysis of how the implementation of blended learning in the third level English class of the New Learning Academy affects participation and student grammar test performance. So I just explained the topic. Now, as far as the justification, right? I noticed during my time at the New Learning Academy that these lessons are about 3 hours long and are held once a week, right? So first of all, with such a large lesson, there's certainly a big chance for the students to have a lapse in attention at some point, right? And again, when it comes to having one class once a week, right, that can certainly affect your memory as well as right your motivation to continue. I also noticed that there was an infrequency of technology aside from just a video sharing platform, and the target language use was seldom really used outside of class, right? So again, right, all of this combined really kind of gives way to a lack of consistent grammar practice, which in effect means lower test scores. The research question, so what we have here is how does the implementation of blended learning in the third level English class of the New Learning Academy affect participation in student grammar test performance? And the general objective is to analyze the same. The specific objectives actually correspond exactly to to the justifications, right? With the first one being to identify students' reactions toward blended learning in terms of participation and sense of achievement, to develop interactive technology-based activities outside of the classroom, and to encourage frequency of language use, and lastly, to evaluate students' improvement of grammar skills focused primarily on test performance. The antecedents, right? So the antecedents cover a historical perspective, an international current perspective, as well as a national perspective. So when looking at the historical standpoint, right, Sir Isaac Pitman was the first one to really kind of start sending letters to his students, instructing them on how to, write shorthand. Then, from a more recent perspective, right, we have the early video-based training of the 1970s to the now common internet-based adaptations. The international investigations were mainly there to support the use of blended learning, and we have a couple of case studies which really kind of increase participation in language use, as well as really showing people that blended learning can be applied in numerous educational settings, all the way from elementary to private academies. From a national perspective, we had a similar results, right, where there were some opportunistic student and student interactions with the implementation of blended learning. Theoretical frameworks, right? So these were the three most important ones for me. Michael B. Horn and Heather Staker definitely helped me to understand what blended learning was about, specifically the subsets of blended learning, including the rotation models, which would include station rotation, lab rotation, and the one that I found most interesting and applied, flipped classroom. Jeremy Batchelor certainly helped me out to understand basically that in this case blended learning was kind of the least impactful specifically with flipped classroom, but the reasoning for that was primarily due to not really letting the students watch the videos or making them watch the videos as part of the grade. And lastly, Aziz Ganaj definitely helped me to understand how to maximize participation in class. The research subjects, we had 15 participants at the New Learning Academy, and some basic characteristics here include their motivation, which was career related. Their age range was 17 to 50, so quite a large age range there. And occupation rights of 14 of them were full-time workers, and we had one full-time high school student. Type of study that was used was the mixed approach, right, where we had a little bit of everything, right, a quantitative and a qualitative methodology. And you'll also see those reflected on the instruments as well. right? So when it comes to the actual procedures, right? So on 6/29, right, June 29th, we started with the observation. Again, there were no really instruments or materials that were involved here. It's just me making observations, and it was certainly impactful. I'll go into that in a couple of minutes here. Aside from that, right, some other activities that we did, including the beginning of the introduction to the Weebly.com website. So I was able to kind of introduce them to my website, as well as to have them take the pre-test, the pre-survey, and the pre-investigation questionnaire to really kind of get their feedback on what they thought of their class as it was. So for the most part, we had some really good results when it comes to blog participation. There were a couple of instances, especially when it happened to be grammar focused, where we didn't really have too much participation. But I would say that overall, when it came to interactive activities and blog assignments, there was certainly a good amount of participation, and the students really appreciated the interactivity and relevance of each of the assignments and activities. The post test, the post survey, and the post questionnaire were given on August the 3rd, right, to just kind of get a conclusion. And I did continue with their class until the end. And that's when I told them that they can continue to use the website, to depend on any kind of studies that they had. When it comes to the data analysis, right, so we had our pre-observation, right, which just kind of elaborate a little bit here, right? There was very little participation overall, a lot of reliance on the textbook, and really no communicative activities were used. So what I observed is that the teacher would kind of ask some questions based on textbook activities, and there was really little incentive for them to answer at all. Uh, Typically the teacher would have to call out a certain student's name in order to get an answer. But when it came to just kind of asking for answers of the class in general, uh, no one rarely really participated. The observation when it came time to use the blended learning methodology, well, ultimately, we had more involved students and even at times impulsive participation, right? Where sometimes students would interrupt each other to kind of give their perspective or their opinions. We definitely saw this more on the competitive activities that I did, as well as the blog assignments where maybe there were some controversial topics relating to COVID. Minimal reliance on the textbook. So again, I wanted to make sure that the students had something that was primarily relevant to them as well as engaging. And I really didn't see that from the textbook. So I tried to kind of really minimize the utilization of it. And mostly communicative activities were used. Again, like I mentioned, competitive games, interactive blogs, and discussions. When it comes to the data analysis, right, and focusing on the questionnaires, so this is a pre-questionnaire, right? So a lot of students really kind of said that employment was a primary factor there, right, when it comes to why they want to study English. Most of them did say that class time wasn't enough, right, to really kind of study, and that they really needed to practice a little bit more outside of class. And when it comes to the frequency of active participation, this was kind of surprising, right? I mean, based on my observation, I really didn't see that there was much participation. So this could have been where maybe they didn't understand the question and, pretty much maybe thought that participation was answering a question when asked. So yeah. The next one, right? Do you like or dislike participating in class? So in this one, most of them did say yes. Again, kind of a surprising answer considering based on my observations, I really didn't see a lot of participation. The post-analysis will tell you kind of a similar story, right? So again, employment was kind of the number one reason for wanting to study English. Um, They did feel that the web page that I made did help them to practice grammar outside of class, so very useful there, and really kind of helps me to really strengthen my argument. They did like participating in the blog assignments, stating that there was more interaction and relevance. I think that has to do primarily with the fact that a lot of the blog assignments were related to COVID, and they would do these at home right after watching the video lesson. But what made it interactive is the fact that in some cases they actually had to reply to their students. But I found that a much better way to kind of make sure that it was interactive was to actually have an open discussion at the very beginning of class, talking about their answers and discussing it among us. And lastly, right, if they felt like they had gained confidence to participate more in class, and it was overwhelmingly positive, right, considering that they did have a better understanding of grammar. This honestly isn't very surprising considering that we did have grammar videos that I personally gave them in the format that the New Learning Academy was supposed to give the grammar lessons. So if for some reason there was a lapse in attention, for example, well, they could always go back and literally rewind the video and review what they had missed. When it comes to the survey, right? So the pre-survey, right before the investigation, pretty much it was equal across the board when it comes to the amount of hours spent outside of class, right? Pretty surprising, right? A couple of these never, some of these under 30 minutes to an hour, and three of them more than an hour. Pretty impressive. Most of them did say that they only depend on the notes that they take in class. So, and I believe one of the students did say that a video sent that reviews everything seen in class. I think they may have misunderstood the question and had put that when they actually saw the the classes that I gave, right, and the videos that I was sending them. Overwhelmingly, most of them did say that they did need more practice outside of class. On the post survey, so you can see right off the bat, the first question is a complete 180, right? I'm not really sure what happened, if the students were lying, or if maybe um, I'm not really sure what happened there, right? But ultimately, the majority went you know, from under 30 minutes or 30 minutes to an hour was kind of the majority there, right? The good news is that I didn't see any never instances just because they had to watch the video in order to understand what would be seen the next class. And those who were more than an hour, well, it's good to see that although two of them did go into one of the other options, one of them did still kind of continue studying more than an hour. Right. They did seem that they liked the topics that were presented to them on the platform, and they did feel that they were very relevant, which was really good. Some of them did seem that, they thought the topics were somewhat relevant, but I would say that that's certainly better than not having any relevance at all. Right. Now, most of them did feel that it helped them to review grammar topics. Again, I think this has to do with the fact that they had a video that they could rewind and access at any time as long as they had an internet connection. When it comes to the quantitative analysis, right, we have our test scores. And as you can see here, the test scores certainly do represent an increase and a benefit with the implementation of blended learning, right? The average was 7.53 before, and this increased to 9.07 overall. So really good stuff, especially considering that the minimum score was 3 and the post-test assignment was 6. Definitely something to consider, especially when you're talking about the present perfect versus the even more complicated present perfect continuous tense. To conclude, right, so ultimately, the conclusions are based on the specific objectives. And I would say that yes, students did increase their participation in class, and they felt that blended learning helped them to feel more comfortable in their English writing abilities. Overall, the post survey definitely reflects a positive outcome regarding the time dedicated to writing practice, the perceived relevance, and just an understanding of content throughout the review. So I think that ultimately they did have an increase in frequency of language use. And lastly, right, students definitely performed better on the grammar test performance. So this was certainly something that definitely helped out when it comes to blended learning. So my expected results, right? So a student did want to use the workbook a little bit more frequently. Kind of makes sense considering they were paying for those workbooks. And so we did try to accommodate their needs by including a couple of workbook assignments, nothing too large considering that they also had to watch the videos and participate in the blog assignments. Another unexpected result was that some students completed the blog assignments right before class, and some of them just didn't do it at all. So, kind of a bit of a downer, but at the same time, even during the class, right, they were able to participate in the discussions and give their opinions, whether they did the assignment or not. And lastly, right, some students did have many absences. Again, 14 out of the 15 students did have full-time jobs. So in some cases, work responsibilities did at times kind of conflict with the class time. To finalize, right, some of my recommendations are that research should be expanded to all educational institutions, just like what was reviewed in the theoretical review, right? So I think that this was done at a private institution, so it would be interesting to see what this looks like in the K through 12 space as well as the university setting. Um, Investigation should last at least a year and must involve more than one course, right? So again, I'm comparing my results based on the observations that I did before implementing the investigation, right? And I would say that overall, this should be compared with a full course, um, and really kind of, to be able to compare exact results, right? It's kind of problematic when you compare maybe a pre-test such as present perfect to a post-test of present perfect continuous. It'd be much better to do a direct comparison of, present perfect with the present perfect on blended learning. Next up, it would be interesting to kind of see blended learning's impact with students with a variety of learning disabilities, just to kind of see, how far we can really kind of expand blended learning. And lastly, it would be interesting to conduct research using multiple learning platforms. So I utilize Weebly.com to create my learning platform, but it would be interesting, especially with public or private institutions, to see how utilizing their budgets to maybe have something a little bit more professional and and technologically probably more enhanced, would be able to really make a difference when it comes to the implementation of blended learning. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you all taking the time to listen to my thesis, and I'm open to any questions. And that will be all for me. Thanks again. And here are my references.